Hello, welcome to this video. So this is one of the less traditional videos on this channel. So I tried to make all my videos natural and stick to the first take wherever possible. But it got to the weekend. I have some time whilst my washing is going around the tumble dryer. And I really wanted to make a video, and I was thinking what might be a good topic to make a video on. So I decided to make one without equations to fall back on or any sort of script. So this very well could turn out to be one of the worst YouTube videos on this channel. Maybe just one of the worst YouTube videos, plainly. However, I think it will be helpful because the topic I'm thinking of doing is something which, if you want to learn physics for yourself, and if you want to, mix up learning physics with just reading generally, might benefit you. And that is how to get the most out of books. So I'll be talking about physics and maths books to start off with, and then I'll be talking about more recreational books, and really I'm going to be talking about how to use them interactively to get the most out of them, because both when it comes to recreation but also more educational books, the way to get the most out of the book is to be interactive with it, and I'll be talking about ways to do that. So if there's a part of physics or maths you really want to learn, this video might be helpful, and if you want to see me go or one of the many other syllables we have in the English language with which to fill mind gaps, then this may well be the video for you. So I hope that kind of vortex animation was fairly helpful in terms of, perhaps making this video slightly exciting at least. And this part will be looking at how to get the most out of reading maths books. So I've got some ideas here, which as I'm making this video is just an empty box, which I will fill in as I look back at the video, because it's just easier to talk about the topic and then see what points come out naturally. So whenever I'm reading a maths book, and at the moment I'm reading a brilliant maths book, which having just come briefly back from the world of maths, is this book, Calculus of Variations. I've read some of it before, giving it a go again because I really want to get through as much maths books as possible because of personal research which is requiring more mathematics than I thought I might need at one point. But when reading a maths book, as I go through, I always write notes. So I'll try and put it here so you can see, fairly detailed maths notes. And I do that because maths books are incredibly typically dense. There are some maths books, like there's a book on real analysis, which I'll try to put a link down to in the description. And that book has a lot of humour. It starts off by talking about ancient Greek paradoxes associated with motion that led to the development of real analysis literally millennia later. But when it comes to most maths books, they are fairly dry and very dense, and also not all of them will write letters in a familiar format. Some, like even use letters from alphabets that many might be less familiar with, particularly in Western culture, such as Hebrew letters. So it's very hard to digest the information. So what I do is write detailed notes, and I'm mainly looking at how to reformat the book into digestible parts. And then you can also use arrows to link one point with another point that it refers to, because sometimes in maths books it will say something like, as laminar 4.1 shows, and then we'll use the result from laminar 4.1 for the proof. And that's really confusing with reading, because you have to flick through many pages to get back to laminar 4.1. I mean, I'll see if I can show you the kind of thing I mean. I mean, you know, here there's like lots of different theorems, very small writing in parts, very, very small writing. So always write notes. Another thing to do is practice the exercises, at least some of the exercises in the book. And if you can, invent your own exercises. I think that's a really good thing to do. And if you can't prove something you've stated, that might indicate that maybe there's some part of the material you don't understand as well as you thought, or maybe you've stumbled across a new idea, or an idea that isn't covered in the book. So it's a really good way to explore. But definitely notes, exercises. Another thing is, if you get stuck with a really technical definition, I would generally not recommend this kind of thing, but for a really technical definition, ChatGPT is awesome, because ChatGPT is essentially a very sophisticated dictionary, but it's actually a dictionary that, thanks to the wealth of resources it has, it's kind of an encyclopedia in some ways. It can describe a really technical thing in really good language. So if you ask, like, you know, what is the derivative of a functional, and then you say something like, I am trying to learn this from first principles for background reading, so give it some context to help ChatGPT know the level to which you want an answer, then ChatGPT is really helpful. And another thing is kind of take your time and always read a book with a mug of tea or coffee. Because on top of tea or coffee being relaxing, well, tea anyway, coffee might make you want to jump up and maybe start dancing, which is probably relaxing, but a hot drink is really good, because on top of being lovely in itself, it will cause you to slow down. When you're reading, you want to make sure you're reading, particularly educational books, slowly and thinking about it. And tea or coffee will mean you're having to slightly multitask, and it will make you pause, and it will slow down your reading. And the key to digesting initially a lot of the material in very dense books is go slowly. You know, life is filled with many wonders, but we have a very long time with which to see the wonders. So, you know, it's about what you get out of an educational book, not the number of educational books you've read. You know. So those are my main tips for maths books, particularly. For physics books it's similar. The difference with physics books is because physics doesn't rely on things being directly logically connected necessarily, in that physics is fine with jumping between things that are connected but don't have to logically be connected, they just are in our universe. Physics books have a lot more equations that jump around in lots of different topics. I'll see if I can find one. So, here's a physics book, Theoretical Physics. It covers the main parts of theoretical physics. And one way you can tell a theoretical physics book is, I don't know if it's visible, I'll try to make sure it's visible. If you can tell, the equations aren't just something like equation 16.7, it's equation 16.77. The next equation is 16.78. And so when you jump 40 pages and it goes, as we found out in equation 16.78, you've probably forgotten what equation 16.78 is, particularly by the time you've spent going through all the 16 point somethings equation to find 16.78. Now I know that probably sounds exhausting, but that's part of the thing with physics. Jumping around the equations is mildly exhausting. So, due to that, when it comes to physics books, I would, at the end of each mini chapter or section, so say at the end of each 16.8 equations, I would write a brief summary saying what those equations were talking about, what they were saying, and the main ideas. And that means when you're jumping back to 16.82, you might not remember what 16.82 is, but you can read the summary of 16.8, and that will make 16.82 far easier to interpret. So when reading physics books, make sure to write summaries, because it will make going back 40 pages to see an equation that you haven't looked at for 2 weeks a lot easier. That would be my recommendation. And also with physics, because it's dealing with the physical universe, coding and trying to solve practical problems in code to apply your physics knowledge is a really good thing to do. So I would recommend coding. CodeCalc is one thing I always recommend. It's free to use, not necessarily the fastest, but it does the job. But there are also probably some other things where you can code for free. And I would definitely recommend learning a bit of coding along with physics, just to help you practice applying the physics equations in some physical context. You can also practice applying the physics equations by hand, particularly if you're doing independent research in physics. You'll be doing a bit of code here and there, but most of it will be doing it on pen and paper. I mean, I guess it depends what you're doing, but, you know, definitely if you're interested in the fundamentals of physics, most of that will be pen and paper, but coding does help practice applying the equations. So, that is my recommendations for how to get the most out of physics and maths books. Now it's time to really confuse the YouTube algorithm and talk about getting the best out of recreational books. And when I say recreational, because, you know, after a while seeing tons of equations about the real world, I kind of want to explore something that isn't the real world and doesn't have equations. I'm going to tend to mean fancy books, but you could extend that to reading, other kinds of literature that are just, to be read for fun, that are, easier to read than really, heavy mathematical or physics books, as great as those kinds of books can be. So, reading for general pleasure. This is what we're going to talk about now. So, there's tons of books which one can read for just fun. There are also ways to listen to them. I mean, personally, when it comes to fancy, I am a massive fan of audiobooks because you can listen to them on the go when walking. If you're walking to the gym, you can listen to them. If you're coming back from the gym, you can listen to them. If you're going to the shops, you can listen to them. So it's a great way to make walking and travel productive in that sense. And there's a lot of audiobook companies out there. The main one is Audible. However, Audible, for various reasons, have questionable practices, which don't really, Audible in its business model isn't particularly great for the people who actually make or write the books that end up being audiobooks. So, although there's lots of benefits to Audible, and I used Audible for quite a long time, I would recommend a Libro. Libro is really, really good. Libro has, a range of fancy books, sci-fi books, and many other kinds of books. I've been recently listening to The Pyramids, which is one of Terry Pratchett's book. The Discworld series is amazing. If you want something more philosophical, The Silmarillion is awesome. There's a lot of really good books. And with those, my main recommendation would be have a time of day where you don't need to think about anything else and you can completely lose yourselves in those kinds of books. Even when travelling, maybe listen to an audiobook when it's on a route you know very well, so you don't have to pay much attention, apart from when crossing roads. That's very important to emphasise. But when walking on pavements, unless it's very busy, losing oneself in an audiobook can be a good experience. I particularly recommend it in parks, because in parks there's lots of space. You can happily meander about far from any vehicles or anything. So, audiobooks in parks, perfect. And I would, if you want to start, reading casually, I would also recommend avoid the books which come in really bulky series. Like, I'm trying to get through Wheel of Time, but even as an avid fan of fantasy, it's hard because Wheel of Time has so many books. The exception I might make is Harry Potter, because although Harry Potter has a large chain of books, really, definitely initially, the books are sort of like the books in a series of unfortunate events, in that the books are fairly episodic and self-contained. As you go to the latter books, and I'm mainly thinking books 5 to 7, then you do kind of need to know a fair bit about what happened in the earlier books. But I think 1 to 4, although the books build on each other, 1 to 4 can be read independently because there's enough info in each book to tell you the stuff you need to know if, say, you're starting at book 3 or book 4 and haven't read 1 or 2. And I think it's important to read books for fun because, books help us engage with the more, shall we say, subjective aspects of reality. Like, physics and maths is great, but by its very nature it deals in what we can define precisely. Whereas, storybooks can deal with things which are much harder to define, but which have equal importance. Concepts such as faith, hope, and so on and so forth. And I think it's really good to have a diversity of reading as well. I've definitely found I can read more educational books if I'm also reading books for just for relaxing, wholesome books, or relaxing but sometimes challenging books even, because some fantasy books can at places get fairly dark, but that's okay because those books are about challenging of one's perceptions of the world, challenging one to really think about situations which may mirror some situations in reality, but which people don't want to necessarily think about, but which is, healthy to do so. And also, fantasy books are just wonderful because they are so imaginative. One of my favourite books has a kind of talking, quite comical, mildly sarcastic dragon, and it's a brilliant character. Well, that sentence will definitely throw YouTube off. Anyway, if you're looking for, some fun books to read, I would also recommend, who is he? Oh gosh, my mind is one blank. The person that wrote Percy Jackson. I started reading a book by him about a hero associated with the Egyptian gods. So, he's covered Roman gods, Greek gods, seemingly Egyptian gods. One learns a lot about kind of religion and various deities and different religions through reading those kinds of books. So I think it's a really wholesome and good thing to do. But in terms of getting the most out of those books, I would encourage creative writing. I've always strongly believed that there should be more creative writing encouraged, early on, and even into teenage years, because, creative writing, you get to explore, you get to create. I think, for me, like, reading literature but not doing creative writing is kind of like reading cooking books but never actually cooking something. There's a lot of value you can get from reading, but I think one gains so much more value from literature if one is creating literature in some form. Now, that doesn't have to be creating whole novels. That can be, writing blogs where you get to have a bit of fun with literature, maybe writing poetry. It can be writing sketches. It can be writing novels. But being creative with literature just enhances it so much more. And as one author said, I can't remember who, but I remember the quote, if there's a book you want to read that isn't written, then write it. And I think that's a great way to think about literature. So anyway, those are a summary of how to get the most out of reading in a very broad sense. So I hope it has been helpful. Um, if you've enjoyed the video, um, consider sharing or liking to help the YouTube algorithm out on this very broad video, which covers a number of topics. But I just want to finish the video by saying I hope you have a great weekend if you're seeing this at the weekend. If not, have a great tomorrow, whichever day of the week tomorrow may be. And best of luck with all your reading and creative endeavours.